Elected leaders and community activists have struggled for decades to find solutions to homelessness in Portland. Tonight, perspective from a man who's been on the front lines for years. Israel Bayer is the executive director of Street Roots, a weekly newspaper in Portland covering issues around homelessness and poverty. Bayer joins us tonight to share his view on combating homelessness and lessons he's learned at the helm of Street Roots. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Israel Bayer has served as publisher and circulation director for Portland's nonprofit newspaper, Street Roots, for 15 years. Under his leadership, the paper has become an award-winning weekly newspaper, and Bayer has become a leading voice on homelessness policy in the Portland Metro. But Bayer announced this week he's stepping down at the end of the year. What does that mean for Street Roots? What are Bayer's future plans? And what are his insights into the state of homelessness in Portland and beyond? Welcome to my guest, Street Roots publisher, Israel Bayer. It's great to have you back here on Straight Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Israel, you've been described as one of the leading moral authorities on homelessness in Portland. You're also instrumental in the success of the Street Roots newspaper. Why did you decide it's time to step down?
Well, I've been working with the street newspaper movement for nearly 15 years now, and I feel that Street Roots is in a really great place to be able to grow and be successful in the future, and it was just time for me to take a mental break. I'm going to write a book and to decide what's next in life, and I feel very confident with where the organization is and happy to be a part of it for all these years.
What do you think has been your biggest accomplishment?
Well, I think that being able to become an award-winning newspaper and insert ourselves into the media climate. I think oftentimes when people think of a street newspaper, they probably have, people think less and we like to deliver more. And I think that Street Roots has always been able to be overachievers and to deliver such a great newspaper that ultimately transfers into vendors being able to have an income and being able to be a weekly publication to give people experiencing homelessness and poverty an income week in and week out is something that we're all very extremely proud of at Street Roots.
For people who don't know, tell us a little bit about the Street Roots newspaper, its content and the business model. It's unique.
Yeah, so Street Roots is a weekly newspaper. We come out every Friday and we have around 170 individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty that sell the newspaper at more than 70 locations and businesses throughout the Portland region. And people come into Street Roots and they purchase the newspaper for 25 cents and then sell it for $1 plus tips. And it gives people the ability to not only have an income, but to gain self-confidence and self-worth, and also have a relationship with the general public in a way that's very unique. Oftentimes people experiencing homelessness can be socially isolated in their environment, and by being able to sell a newspaper in front of a New Seasons or a Powell's or a Laughing Planet, it gives them the opportunity to build authentic relationships with people in a way that creates a lot of hope in people's lives, and when we have hope, there's anything is possible.
I know whenever I see one of the Street Roots vendors outside a coffee shop or somewhere, I always enjoy stopping to talk to them. I can't go by without buying a paper because it makes you feel good, and also it's a good paper. Yeah, we're very proud of the content that we create under the leadership of our managing editor, Joanne Zool, and our staff. We've been able to tackle a broad range of subject matters. So I think people do think of us as just a homeless newspaper, but we're so much more. We cover issues of the environment, the criminal justice system, poverty, labor, all kinds of things that affect our community in a much more intentional way. So readers have grown to really appreciate the original content and the quality of the content that we're producing. So not only is it a social, economical opportunity for people on the streets, but it's also a product that people want and have built into their daily lives in a way that's helping them become educated about the world we live, but also helping individuals on the street. So it's a win-win situation. In your statement that you were leaving, that appeared in the Willamette Week, I want to read part of your statement and then we'll talk about it. You said, "Personally, I've always tried to lead the organization in a way that wasn't geared toward doing the popular thing thing, but the right thing for both the organization and people on the streets. It has meant giving my blood, sweat, and tears while also experiencing some of the most traumatic and joyful times in my life. It has not always been easy to navigate the small world of Portland politics. It has meant speaking truth to power and trying to the best of my ability to always think about moving the issue of homelessness forward, regardless of the consequences. I've always tried to do so with integrity, sometimes getting it right and sometimes not. What has it been like working with the powers that be in Portland as an advocate for the homeless?
Well, you know, I think homelessness becomes in many ways a political football in the political spectrum. And you have to be able to work with people on one hand, but also be able to be critical on the other. And that's threading a very fine needle. So oftentimes we may be working with the county chair or the mayor on one subject, but also critiquing them on another. And I think that in a town like Portland, that in many ways is very passive aggressive, it can be challenging as an advocate to be able to move the dial forward while also being critical. And I think that we at Street Roots have tried to the best of our ability to always approach those situations with integrity, but also by telling truth to power. And you know, homelessness is one of those things where I believe the general public cares very deeply about homelessness, but they're frustrated about the realities that are happening on the streets and before their eyes. And so it's constantly a changing environment that sometimes becomes very political, and other times it's more about charity. And I think just navigating all those waters can be complex and very sophisticated at times. And we try to the best of our ability at Street Roots to always stay true to the people, but also stay realistic in what we're able to achieve as a community.
City and county leaders said a recent point-in-time census gave them reason for optimism that they are making progress. They said the numbers showed that while the total homelessness population has gone up, the number of people on the streets has gone down. Let's take a look at the numbers. This is from a February census. It showed 4,177 total homeless people either outdoors or in shelters. That is a 10% increase overall. 2,509 in shelters or transitional housing. That's a 31% increase for shelters. And 1,668 sleeping outdoors or in cars. That's an 11.6% decrease since 2015. Is that encouraging to you that more people are in shelters and they say fewer on the streets?
Well, look, homelessness is so complex. So Portland and Multnomah County do a phenomenal job at being able to house individuals that are experiencing homelessness. The problem is, and as we've talked about before on this show, that homelessness is a product of a much deeper, complex reality, and we don't have the resources always to scale up to actually solve the problem. So we are put in a situation where we have to manage the problem. And so I believe that Portland and Multnomah County are doing the best of their ability to be able to house individuals, but unfortunately they're a part of a climate and outside forces that create poverty and homelessness that we always end up having people on the streets. So if you're a common Portlander and you go to Waterfront Park every day, you may not know that we've been able to house 15 people in Waterfront Park this year because you're seeing 15 more people sleeping on the streets. So the psyche of the general public is, oh my gosh, homelessness is not going away and we're not making a dent, when we know we're able to house people given the resources. But unfortunately, the reality is the political climate that we're in, that homelessness is an epidemic that exists all over the West Coast and all over the United States. And until we have adequate federal support and our state legislature that prioritizes housing, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see homelessness in our communities for years to come.
And we're seeing a symptom of that on the Springwater Corridor. They did big sweeps last year that made the news, and now we have reports with neighbors saying some of the campers are coming back to the Springwater Corridor. We sent our KGW drone up this week, Fly 8, to take a look, to give us a bird's eye view, and you can see here we see some tents coming back. You're not a big fan of sweeps. What do you think the city should do?
Well, I think that you have to be able to take a harm reduction approach to being able to target criminal behavior on one hand, but being able to work with people on the streets on the other. The reality is homelessness in Portland parks is a direct result from actually our city being so successful. So, you know, in the past, there were places in our community where folks on the streets could go what we would call low barrier camping. So not even 10, 15 years ago, the backside of the Pearl, the Buckman neighborhood in inner east side Portland, places all over our community that weren't developed the way they are today were places where people could experiencing homelessness. So unfortunately, the parks have become the last refuge of so many campers because we're actually, all of our neighborhoods throughout our community are actually thriving. And so I think you could probably argue that while you could argue different aspects of a specific neighborhood, every neighborhood in Portland's livability is thriving or at least on the rise. And so that poses a big problem in the context of how you deal with livability on the streets, because people experiencing homelessness simply have no place to go. And so
And a lot of neighborhoods are talking about this. The Montavilla neighborhood, for one, some of them are going against the tide. The Montavilla Neighborhood Association approved a resolution requesting that Mayor Wheeler and the City Council stop sweeping homeless camps within that neighborhood's boundaries. Now, that didn't sit well with some neighbors who felt blindsided by that resolution. We attended their neighborhood meeting this week where they talked about it. Let's listen to part of that conversation.
It was a statement we made that was simply asking that the city stop endorsing sweeps as a tactic and try to come up with some alternative solutions.
I think there's a portion of the neighborhood who felt blindsided by the resolution.
We've had to cut our bushes down because people are pooping in our front yard. They're throwing needles in our yard. I live next to a zombie home.
We've seen assaults, we've seen break-ins, we've seen theft on a grand scale.
What about the people that want to get on with their life, that's living on the streets, that's been forced on the street by gentrification?
But it's good to see the community invigorated around certain issues. I think controversy is good because sometimes it'll bring up new solutions.
Looking for new solutions. What do you think about the conversation going in that neighborhood?
Well, I think Montavilla is probably an example of conversations happening in every neighborhood, and I think that as Portlanders, we want to be able to have the political will to support people experiencing homelessness, get into housing, but unfortunately, sometimes we don't always know how to deal with it when it's right on our front doorstep. And so it's important right now. We're at an intersection in our community where our community leaders, our elected leaders, are going to have to show a tremendous amount of courage to be able to step up and invest in housing and ultimately create the political will for both people that may be bleeding heart liberals that want to support the homeless in their neighborhood and those that want the homeless out of their neighborhood. I think we can agree that both sides want to be able to find the right solutions for those individuals, and it takes the right kind of leader to be able to take those fractured sides of the community and all drive them in the same direction. And we know that as we passed the housing bond this last November, when you create big opportunities to be able to support people experiencing homelessness, Portlanders will get behind it. But if you get locked into these small arguments, you can just spin yourselves in circles, and ultimately we need leaders to lead and be able to come up with big, bold, courageous ideas to be able to drive the housing agenda here in Portland.
Let's listen to the neighbors a little bit more, because it is showing this fracture, and the neighborhoods are really feeling what you said, the growth in the community with a lot of the camping spilling into their neighborhoods. People are getting fatigued.
Yep.
They look around and they see, you say that 15 people have been housed or put in shelters, but then they see tents lining the streets, it seems like, in every nook and cranny. And then on our news this week, we saw that people who live near the Park Rose ball field in northeast Portland say homeless campers destroyed the ball field there, tearing apart dugouts, trashing bathrooms, leaving broken glass and hypodermic needles there. And now the board is going to have to sell the property because they say they can't afford the cost of the cleanup. And to another neighborhood, the Laurelhurst neighborhood, they also had a meeting this week where they proposed something called safe zone ordinances to prohibit people from camping within 1,000 feet of, say, a ball field, a playground, a park, or a school in Portland. And they want all neighborhoods to band together to try to get the city council to pass this ordinance. Let's listen to what they said at their neighborhood meeting on Wednesday night.
And sitting down to eat your breakfast, and you look out your dining room window and someone is defecating at the end of your driveway. That is a very real scenario. That's happened multiple times.
We have a beautiful park that should be enjoyed by visitors, tourists, and every other member of Portland, but it's not a fun place to visit right now.
I want a game plan, an announced game plan from City Hall. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to address it. And we want long-term solutions.
You know, we hear you. We're trying to do more. And I believe our budget that we just adopted reflects a tremendous amount of allocation of resources towards solving the livability issues.
I think we hear from the neighbors if they feel like City Hall is hearing them, but they want to see action. What do you think about this safe zone ordinance?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably a little bit pie in the sky. I think the reality is that we coexist with our homeless neighbors. We're not talking about people from Mars. We're talking about our neighbors, residents, Americans, people who are down on their luck and having hard times. You know, Portland is a thriving city right now, and unfortunately, we live in a city at the moment with the haves and have-nots. And neighborhoods really have a choice. They can choose to respond by trying to simply get homeless people out of their neighborhoods, or they could respond in a similar way that the Kenton neighborhood responded by offering up the ability to provide tiny homes on certain lots and trying to be a part of the solution. I think the Park Rose specifically is a perfect example of why try to kick homeless people out of there, but why not use the resources that exist within the nonprofit community and government to try to provide a win-win situation. And that would be maybe a perfect opportunity to create another tiny home village for people on the street. So, you know, hey, the reality is our city is being gentrified. There's an overrepresentation of people of color. Poor people are being pushed out of our communities. And so, you know, for a lot of people, we can't have our cake and eat it too. We are an urban environment, we are a city, and we have to be able to find ways to be able to support people of all income levels. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a housing crisis in our community that is pushing thousands of people to the edges of society, and we're just going to have to simply live with that in one way or another. And ultimately, we're going to have to come up with solutions to all work together, because ridding homeless people completely in Portland is simply not going to happen.
I want to talk more about that when we come back. Maybe, as the gentleman said in Montavilla, that these conversations, the controversy may create new solutions. And we'll talk about that and the future of street routes, the future of Israel Bear when we come back in 2 minutes.